Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and okay, my story with Clancy is, and I have it here in one of my recordings where I celebrated a birthday, and then during my talk at the beginning of the meeting, I said that it was my first attempt in 1985 to get sober, and it didn't take, of course, because I came back in 94. And I told Clancy I was living in Stockton, and I heard Clancy was going to come to speak, and I thought to myself, I don't need to hear this guy, Clancy. So I did go to the convention or the meeting or wherever it was he was speaking. So Clancy gets up to start talking. He says, Dave, are you still here? I says, yeah, I'm right here. He says, you know, we held that meeting up for 15 minutes waiting for you. So there's my Clancy story. Take care and have a good day if you want to. I know I will.
My name is Clancy Imislund, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm very glad to be here this morning, safe and sane and sober, as I like to say, because I didn't used to be, and I may not be again sometime, but I am this morning, and I feel good. I've enjoyed this weekend very much, as I always do. I want to thank Shirley for all her kindnesses. They'll just hear that on the tape, say, wasn't he thoughtful? But the subject this morning is something that we hear a lot about, and we all seem to kind of know what it means, but I always find it fascinating when I realize how close we were not to have it. I just want to give you a little background to the thing. You know, there seems to be types of alcoholics. We never talk about types of alcoholics, but there are types of alcoholics. There's a type of alcoholic that seems to be an alcoholic by any way you measure them. They drink and have trouble, but something happens that really threatens their security. Maybe they lose a job, they lose a home, a family, and they quit, and they never drink again. And my mother's uncle is one of those people, and I know other people like that. And these are the people for whom treatment centers were originally created, that type of alcoholic who had become physically addicted to alcohol. We don't hear much in AA about the physical addiction to alcohol either, but that's a significant thing. And most alcoholics don't have it, but when you drink a long time, an awful lot, you can become addicted, and it's really quite dreadful. We talk so much about narcotics addiction, how dreadful it is, but I'll tell you something. Withdrawal from alcohol addiction is much more lethal, much more fatal than withdrawal from drug addiction. These are the people that alcoholic addiction, for whom treatment centers were created to medically withdraw them step by step, so they don't go through the DTs, the convulsions. These are all withdrawal symptoms from addiction to alcohol. And they bring them, they have the treatment centers, traditionally they bring them out, they show them their problem, they explain why they must stop drinking, and they come out of the treatment center, and they quit. And they never drink again. Up in Seattle, there's that famous Seattle hospital, Schick-Shadell. They advertise, we will cure your alcoholism in 30 days, and that includes follow-up visits. And I'll tell you something, they have a long list of names who they've done it for. It's not a false promise. That's one type of alcoholic. Then there's another type of alcoholic. They seem to be an alcoholic by any way you measure them. They drink and get in trouble, have problems. Something happens that really threatens their security. They lose a job, lose a family, somebody dies, and they quit. But they always begin to drink again. And these same type of people come out of treatment centers with tears of sincerity rolling down their cheeks. I've learned my lesson, thank you. I quit. But they always drink again. And these are the type of alcoholics that have puzzled society for a long time, over 4,000 years, as Johnny Harris likes to quote me as saying. I promised I'd get his name in somehow. But, you know, at one time they thought people like this must be possessed by the devil. They put them to death, flogged them, send them away, and put them in jail. In fact, when I was a little boy, now I'm an old man now, but I'm not 4,000 years old. But when I was a young boy growing up in Wisconsin, although I didn't know it and didn't care, they still had found no answer to that problem. There was still no answer to it. The closest thing to it was something called the Keeley cure, or some other treatments where they gave you alcohol with drugs in it that made you sick. And you drink that and, you want another one? No, I don't believe so. Another cure. Well, that is very odd, since I've been sober out in Redlands at the White Memorial Hospital in the 1960s. They had a two-page article in the Los Angeles Times, a new cure for alcoholism. These religious people who are very much against drinking but realize it exists set up one of their wards as an actual bar with a back bar full of whiskey and a bartender, and they'd bring these poor boobs in there the first morning. You want a drink, partner? You gonna give me some damn drugs or something? No, swear to God, just straight stuff. All right, man. You people here know how to treat alcoholics, I'll tell you that for you. They do that for a few days. They had the glasses on a cord, I guess, so they wouldn't take it back to the rooms. And they'd give them a drink, and one morning they'd give them a drink, and they'd run an electric shock through that cord. Hold the ice next time, Fred. Then they'd give them a couple drinks without a shock. Then pretty soon they give them a shock. And I guess it's kind of funny watching these guys. So finally they say, do you want a drink? No, I don't believe I do. And another cure. And it wasn't until months later that somebody did a follow-up and discovered most of them didn't get beyond the first bar that didn't have any cords on their glasses. But they're always trying to find a finite method of getting these people to stop drinking, and there doesn't seem to be any. And that's why this chain of funny events. 1930, family in New York, as most of us know, very wealthy manufacturing family, had a son who they were grooming to take over their company. And he had a tendency to get fits of nervousness every so often, months apart, and get terribly drunk. And they couldn't understand that. What in his psyche is causing this? So they contacted the best doctor in the world that they could do, psychiatric doctor. A lot of people don't know this. They contacted Dr. Freud in Vienna. And Dr. Freud in Vienna refused to take the case, which is the first break we ever got anywhere, you know. We'd all be sitting here drunk this morning saying, but I dreamt I was sober. So they got his associate, Dr. Jung, in Zurich. Incidentally, I'm going to Zurich to speak in January, and I'm going to find Dr. Jung's grave. I'm going to jump up and down on it. You never helped us at all, you old fool. You know. But he had the guy come over, apparently, and as the story goes, he had him in his hospital, and he worked with him every day to break through that psychiatric wall that was creating these feelings. And after a year, he finally realized, I think you've got the answer now, Roland. You seem to be doing much better. You understand it. I think you can go home, and I don't think you'll be troubled again. So he went home, stopped in Paris. Some wealthy friends of his family had a dinner in his honor for his new life. They all toasted in wine. And 3 days later, he was face down again in his own vomit. And they couldn't understand why. He didn't get any nerves this time, just got drunk. So they took him back to Dr. Jung, and Dr. Jung refused to take him back. And they said, but gee, Dr. Jung, he didn't mean any harm. He just seemed to have something struck him. He said, I don't think that, I don't believe he did any harm either, but I see now that I misdiagnosed his case. I realized now that he is what is known as a compulsive alcoholic, chronic alcoholic, and I'm afraid there is no effective treatment for that condition today in the world at any cost. and bad news to get, What does that mean, doctor? He says, what it means, Roland, is that you must keep yourself confined voluntarily or involuntarily as long as you live. Otherwise, you almost certainly will intermittently drink to excess until you die or go mad. Bad news. He says, is there any possible alternative, doctor? And doctor said, well, he said, I've read the literature. There's been some cases of some involuntary psychiatric reversion. They call it a spiritual experience. But I've never known of one personally. I've never known anyone who knew of one. I would say your chances of being hit by lightning are greater than having an involuntary spiritual experience of that sort. So Roland came home this time. And he did not stop for any dinners in Paris. He came home, and on the ship on the way home, he did something, I suppose, that most of us have to do somewhere along the line, although we don't often know it. He surrendered to the fact that there was no hope. And he came back, and he didn't know what to do. And there was a new thing, new rage in America, new spiritual rage at the time going on. That's kind of an interesting thing, too. In the 1908, in Pennsylvania, some Lutheran minister up there came to the conclusion that Christianity was getting too loose. They didn't have the dedication they used to have in the old days, in the first century, be willing to be crucified for your faith, to be crucified upside down and burned. And he started an organization called the First Century Christian Association. And he asked people to come and join him. Are you kidding, Reverend? I don't want to be crucified upside down and burned, for Christ's sake. It didn't really do really well. They got a few old fanatics stumbling around, but after the First World War, he went to Europe and talked it up a little bit. And of all things, the students at one of the universities there thought it was just wonderful, and they accepted it wholeheartedly. This is great. We want to get into this, yeah. So much so they changed the name to the Oxford Group for Oxford University. And he came back in the late 1920s, and he had the imprint of the Oxford University loving this, so it really had something to go on now. And a lot of people got interested in it in 1929, 1930, 31. Oddly enough, just as Roland needed them, Roland saw this, he said, I'll go there. As he wrote later, I wanted to stay sober as long as I could, so when I died drunk, my parents would have a pleasant memory of me. This sad thing. And he went to the Oxford Group and got caught up in it and did very well. Just boom, boom, boom. Yeah. And he stayed sober for 2 or 3 years without a doubt, without any problem. His family was so proud that he had become president of the corporation. They said, Roland, after 3 years, you're doing so well, you never take a vacation. Why don't you go up to our summer home in Vermont, where we always went up when you were young as a boy and spend the summer? Go up there for a couple of weeks and take a vacation. He said, okay. And he arbitrarily chose 2 weeks. And the irony there is this. If he'd have gone a week later, we would not be here. Just amazing. So many things had to fall into place. He got up there, and one of his childhood friends came over and said, Roland, glad you're here. By the way, our childhood chum, Ebby, is a bad drunk. And I know you quit drinking. Would you talk to him? He said, sure. So they brought Ebby, and Roland explained to him he had to find a power greater than himself and to throw himself into it. I don't want to hear that religious crap, Roland. Come on. And away he went. And the next week, he was driving his car drunk and drove into somebody's house, and they arrested him and took him to jail. And the kid came back to Roland and said, Roland, could you come over and talk to the judge? He's my father, but he won't listen to me. But he listens to you because he knows your father and knows your family. Since you are here, would you talk to him and put in a good word for him? He's going to go to the penitentiary because he's on probation. So Roland went to the court, said, I'm here, Judge. You know my mother and you know my father. And I used to be a terrible drinker, but I found a way out of it. I think that can help Ebby find a way out of it. Would you release him in my custody? I'll take him to New York and put him in the Oxford Group. Maybe that'll help. The judge said, only because it's you, Roland. I wouldn't do this for anyone else, but I know your family, I know you, I know your history. But if he comes back to Vermont, he's going to go to the penitentiary. So I took him back to New York and put him in a mission down on Lower Broadway. Got him going to Oxford group meetings. And he wasn't thrilled about it, but it beats the penitentiary. And he did fairly well. He stayed sober. And one day Roland came by and said, well, Ebby, you're doing great. Time to testify. I said, what are you talking about? He said, in the Oxford group, when we get a certain amount of growth, we find someone outside of the group and testify and tell them what we found. And Ebby said, I'm not going to testify. That's embarrassing. He said, you want to go back to Vermont? No, I believe I'll testify. So Ebby had a brainstorm. He remembered a drunken friend of his who was even a bigger mooch than he was. And he'd gone to New York living off his wife, couldn't hold a job, just a bum now. He thought, I could testify to this idiot. He won't even remember it. So that'll be good. So he found out how to get a hold of Bill Wilson in Brooklyn and made an arrangement to come over and see him. And our book talks about it. Bill talks about how he came to the door and Ebby was there, very sober and clean cut, resplendent. Come in. He said, how did you do it, Ebby? And Ebby said, I found religion, Bill. And that was the end of that. Now, I heard Ebby talk at the International Convention in 1960, and he carried the story a little bit farther. He sat at the kitchen table and tried to tell Bill, and Bill just drank as fast as he could. That's wonderful, Ebby. And it kind of hurt Ebby's feelings to be outsmarted by this drunken puke. So he came back 3 days later, and he had the Oxford group closer with him. Mr. Wilson, want to talk about the Oxford? And Bill did as I hope any one of us would do, just got drunker. Screw you, screw the Oxford group, shit. And a couple of months later, Bill was sitting thinking, I really was not very kind to Ebby. He was trying to help me in his dumb way. But he told me he was living over in a mission in I'm going to go over there and I'll apologize and make it right. So one November morning, he got on L and started over and got off in one place. And had a few drinks and got a few more blocks, made another few drinks. And the time I got there, he was kind of buzzed up. And Ebby wasn't there, but he gave a short sermon anyway to help the others. Staggered on down the street and wound up again in town hospital, where he'd been several times before. And this time, a little different. The doctor called up his wife and said, Mrs. Wilson, I hate to tell you this, but this may be your husband's last trip here. I don't think he can survive another one. He's pretty bad shape. I think we can get him through this one, but we may not get through the next one. And that made Lois very upset. And she called the mission where Ebby was. Ebby, could you go talk to Bill? He might die. So we took a couple guys and went up there and saw him. Bill, we've got to talk to you. You've got to find a power greater than yourself. You've got to find some way to... Because I don't want to hear that religious crap. That doesn't work. He said, okay. They went home. In the middle of the night, this frightened, sick, semi-dying, drunken fool waked up in the middle of the night, terrified. And he shouted out, God, if you're there, show yourself. And he wrote later, all of a sudden the room was full of light, like somebody snapped a switch on. He couldn't believe it. And the windows were closed, but he felt a wind blowing through. And he said, my God, I'm going insane. I'm having a psychiatric breakdown. Maybe I'm going insane. And he couldn't make out he had a great feeling of well-being, but what could this be? And the light went out again, and the wind stopped. And in the morning, he told the doctor about it. He said, Doctor, have I had a psychiatric breakdown? Am I over the line now? And the doctor said, no, Bill. In your eyes, I don't know what has happened to you last night, but whatever it was, hang on to it. You seem to be a changed man. And Bill came out of the hospital and went to the Oxford group. Now you think, what do we care about Roland and Ebby and all that stuff? For only this reason, of the very few people that ever had a emotional, spiritual experience, whatever they did, they went to church work, got involved in the church. And he thought somehow he'd had a calling to help drunkards. And so he went to the Oxford group. And he knew he was there to help drunkards the way he'd been helped. And every day, he would get up in his home in Brooklyn, come over to Manhattan sometimes, find a street drunk, take him to the Oxford group meetings. I'll tell you why about that. The Oxford group by this time had evolved into kind of well-to-do people, meeting in one another's homes and discussing the spiritual values they could find. And here's an old street drunk. I believe you're vomiting on my shoes, sir. They would try to fill him full of Jesus, but they didn't do well. And he'd bring them home sometimes. When he had no place to stay, he'd let them stay at home. And his wife was working, trying to support him. She didn't have much of a job, basement of a cheap apartment store. And she once upon a time had been a chic young society girl, had now down to this, trying to stay with this drunken puke. And he'd bring people to the Oxford group. And after about 6 months of this, one morning he got up and he noticed the guy he'd brought home the night before had decamped. Not only left, but taken the coffee pot, apparently to sell, to get for wine or something. And he looked at his wife, old before her time, salt and pepper hair, putting on her sweater with a patch on the sleeve to go to work in this cheap department store and be treated like a piece of crap when she should be treated like a lady. And he had a terrible wave of remorse. He said, "Lois, I'm so sorry. I thought that thing in the hospital, I thought that was some kind of a calling for me to help drunkards. But I've been working with people every day for 6 months, and not one person has stayed sober. And that tells me this is not working, and I'm doing something wrong, and I'm gonna get a job tomorrow if it's shoveling dirt, and I'm gonna let you stay home, honey, because you deserve some rest after all this, and I'm gonna do something about it. I wanted so much to help people, but not one person has stayed sober. I'm done." And that moment, your life and mine was on a thread about that big, with a pair of scissors just coming to it. And she turned and said something to him that changed the course of history. I was having lunch with her about 30 years ago up in Connecticut, I guess. I said, "Lois, how did you ever think of that answer? My God, you changed the course of history." She said, "It seems so simple to me." He said, "Not one person has stayed sober." And she said, "You did." He said, "Oh, yeah." That's why old timers don't have much hair in front. You just go through life. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So he wanted to do something more, though. He went down to see the doctor at the hospital, Dr. Silkworth, who he had seen a number of times as a patient. And Dr. Silkworth was glad to see him sober 6 months. He said, "Doctor, I'm trying so hard to help these people, and I can't help one of them. I'm bringing them to the Oxford group. I'm telling them about the Oxford philosophy." And the doctor says, "You're doing it wrong." And right there, although we never talk about that conversation, that is as big a conversation as has ever been held in the history of AA. He said, "Bill, you're trying to teach him religion. No drunk ever got sober on religion. What you got to do is try to get through to him." And he didn't know exactly what he meant, but in retrospect, we know what he meant, because when you think about it, drunks like us have, among other things in common, we seem to have an invisible wall around us that is impervious to advice. And that's what makes people so baffled. I talked to that son of a bitch for 2 hours and you went out and got drunk. Yeah, that's right. Usually I get a little further into my talk. That's all right. I'm used to pain, that's all I've ever known. But, But that a very, very important talk. He said, Bill, don't preach religion to them. And preach what you have in common with them. Tell them about the medical aspects of it, what it does to the body, and tell them maybe why you drink and what it does for you and why you should drink to maintain things feeling good and why you feel when you're sober so you have to drink. He says, I can't tell them this. I have no idea what the hell it's about. But you do. Try that. And Bill said, well, I can't see how that'll make any difference at all, but I'll try it. And he went home, and shortly thereafter, he got an offer of a job after all these months of being sober. Maybe they believed the old fool could stay sober. This guy called him in and said, Bill, we got this deal, this rubber machinery company out in Akron, Ohio, and I think we can take it over with proxies, but we need someone to go out there and pick up those proxies. Would you please go out there and, you used to work on Wall Street, you know what to do. Get the proxies. We'll make you president of the company. However, if you blow this, don't even come back around Wall Street again because you're done here. But I'll do it. I'll do it. He took a trade out there and got going on these proxies. And in a remarkably short time, the whole deal blew up. And he found himself standing in a hot Saturday morning, Saturday before Mother's Day, actually, 1935, in this lobby of the hotel, fingering $10 bill. He could either pay his hotel bill or take a train home. He didn't want to go home because he'd have to go home and admit failure, and Lois would be in trouble again, and he would be less than. But he couldn't stay. He didn't know what to do. And God, that story is so touching to me. A few years ago, they've revised the hotel and changed it around, but I stood in there, I don't know, 45, 50 years ago, when it was still the same as it was when he was there. I tried to stand in the same spot as far as I could determine where he was standing, feeling bad. And over there, there's a door, and over the door, there's one of those curved signs, orange neon that says cocktails. And as he wrote later, I stood there, and I heard the sound of clinking glasses coming out of that door. And I knew, he knew something that I'm sure every one of us would know in that situation. I knew if I just had a couple drinks, I could think of an answer. God, so close to extinction, boy. And he started to walk. Every step he took, you and I got closer to being skeletons. And out of the corner of his eye, he saw some telephones over there in the wall, as most of us know. And he remembered he'd promised his big deal Oxford group friends in New York he would call somebody before he did anything drastic. He went over there. I'm sure some of you have been to small town hotels. They have the list of churches over the phones and the minister and the phone number. The Presbyterian and the Baptist and the Lutherans, the bigger denominations. And he called up the top name with a nickel. And the man said, he said, I'm a rumhound from New York. I need to talk to somebody in the Oxford group. Man said, I don't know what you're talking about, sir. I'm trying to write a sermon. Please don't bother me. Hung up. Next call, nobody answered. Next call, nobody answered. Next call, man said, I can't help you. I wish I could, but I don't. I don't know how to help you. And he turned away. And he just stopped and think, now put yourself in that situation. What's the thought? I did what I said I would. I did what I said I would. And he saw the last name on the list. Such a funny name, it stopped him. Walter Tunk. I'll call Walter Tunk and get that out of the way. So he called Walter Tunk. Walter Tunk said, funny you should call. Now here's an interesting thing. Walter Tunk is the only man in Akron that moment that could have helped him. And he got him. He said, funny you should call. One of my parishioners is a very wealthy woman, heiress to a rubber company fortune, and she goes to the Oxford group, and she was just telling me that her doctor in the Oxford group has just confessed several times over the past couple of years to being a drunkard, and they've tried to help him in any ways, and they can't. And she just feels so bad. Maybe I can put you in touch with her and somehow work with him. I said, okay. He said, stay in that phone booth. And the Reverend Walter Tunk called this woman out, who was the recently divorced wife to the Goodyear Rubber Company fortune. And she had a big guest house out in West Akron, bigger than most people's mansions. And she said, yes, Dr. Smith, maybe we can get him to talk to this man. So she called Dr. Smith's house. And the phone rang and rang and rang and rang, and our lives began going down again. And all of a sudden, she started to hang up here. Hello. I'm sorry, I was out in the yard. How can I help you? This is Mrs. Smith. And she told her about it. She said, well, yes, that sounds wonderful. I can't get the doctor to talk to him today because he's drunk on the floor and can't walk. He just came home. He came home with some potted plants for Mother's Day. He said, here, honey, here's a potted plant, and I'm another one, and lay down. So he said, I bet we can get him up on his feet tomorrow. So he said, okay. So the parishioner called back Dr. Tunk, and Dr. Tunk called back Bill. Now stop and think, if any of those people hadn't answered the phone, we'd be dead. If any one of them if Mrs. Smith hadn't got that last ring, we would be dead. God, that's just scary. Anyway, so they made arrangements for Bill to go out to this wealthy woman's house on Sunday morning on the streetcar and meet the drunken doctor. And the way he went out there, and the doctor went out. The doctor's son, they called him Young Bob, but he wasn't, he's dead now from old age, but at that time he was young. He died at my age, stop it. Maybe he had to suffer scornful laughter before he went to. Anyway, when he came to AA at the, I don't know if you know this or not, 1980, we're sitting in the International Convention in New Orleans. You were a speaker there, weren't you, Johnny? I should have been. But at the last meeting, they said, we have someone here of great interest to you, Dr. Bob's son. Nobody ever knew he had a child before. And here comes this young guy out, Doctor, but we all jumped up and cheered. And then he said, my name is Bob Smith. Yeah, Bob. And I'm an Al-Anon. Oh. We finally forgave him. But he talks about going out there. His dad was too drunk and sick to drive. So he sat in the back seat with his mother. And he and his sister sat in the front seat, and he drove. He was 16 years old. And all the way out there, his father, all he does, and I'll go out and talk to this guy. But I'm not going to listen to any more sermons about my drinking. I'm so sick of listening to sermons about my drinking. I know I've ruined your Mother's Day, and I know that you hate it, and I'm going to try to make up to it a little bit by doing this. But I'm not going to listen to any more of that crap. So they went out there. These two guys met. They had a brief bite to eat. But went off into a room. The doctor said, I'll give him 10 minutes, Ann. And they were in there 6 hours. And they came out, and the doctor, Bill had tried Dr. Silkworth's idea for the first time of talking about feelings and how so drinking. And Dr. Bob said, Ann, I can't believe it. That's the first man I ever talked to who seemed to know how I feel and why I drink. He said, I can't believe it. He said to Bill, could you stay with us a couple of weeks so we could talk a little bit more? And Bill thought, let's see. I have no way to get out of town. Yeah, I could stay. So he moved in with him. And for 2 weeks, every day, they talked about the deep spiritual values of the Oxford group and what could be gained and how to get closer to Jesus and how to find God's love. And they really Dr. Bob he was kind of a religious guy, and he had a library full of religious books. He just blossomed. At the end of 2 weeks, he said, Bill, this has been the best 2 weeks. Great. This weekend in Atlantic City is the National Convention of the American Medical Association. I was there last year, and I was so drunk, they ridiculed me and they treated me like a piece of crap. But I'm going to go there this year and show them how I really am. I want you to stay here with my wife and kids, and I'll be back Tuesday morning. And away he went. Tuesday morning, the phone rang. Woman on the phone said, Mrs. Smith, this is the doctor's office nurse. I'm so sorry to tell you this, but they carried the doctor off the train this morning so drunk he couldn't walk, and they laid him on the platform, and the station agent knew who I was, so he called me, and I came down here, and the cab driver and I wrestled him into a cab, and he's on the floor of his office now. I know he was trying so hard. We all had such hopes for him, but I guess it doesn't work. And right there again, boy, I tell you, so close. And Mrs. Smith says, okay, I'll come down and get him. And she brought the bill down. They came down and wrestled him in the car and got him home and put him to bed. And not only was he drunk, but he was crying drunk. There's nothing in the world more sickening than a crying drunk. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. Boom, you know. And Thursday morning, he sat up and, what day is it? He said, it's Thursday, Bob. Oh, my God. I've got to do a cancer surgery today. Look at my hand. I can't hold a knife. They'll take my license. I've postponed this twice before. My God, what am I going to do? And they got him up, and they bathed him. And his new friend Bill got him a little booze to settle his hand. And away he went to the hospital to do the surgery. He said, I'll be home about 2 o'clock. Okay, Bill. Okay, Bob. And 2 o'clock, he didn't come. 3 o'clock, he didn't come. 4 o'clock, he didn't come. 5 o'clock, he didn't come. Everybody knew the son of a bitch is drunk again. 6 o'clock, he burst through the door, cold sober. He said, boy, do I feel good. He said, where you been, Bob? He said, when I was doing that surgery, I remember what they've been telling me in Oxford group, that you have to make amends to people. But I never thought a doctor should have to make amends. But I realized I'm a human being first. And I've been all over Akron today making amends to people, and I feel great. And that was the birthday of Alcoholics Anonymous, June 10th, 1935, which we celebrated yesterday. I don't want to say this, but I might as well get out of the way. This is the signal for applause. This is the signal for muffled sobs. Anyway. But you know what they had learned from that experience? Sitting talking about religion had not kept Dr. Bob sober. And it hadn't kept Bill sober. What had kept them sober was trying to talk to drunkards about their feeling. The one thing we see in retrospect now about alcoholics, as I mentioned earlier, they have this impervious wall that advice just bounces off. And the difficulty in ever helping such a person is that somehow you've got to get through that wall. And that's what making them feel they're not so unique as they thought. There are other people who've had the same feelings you have. And the other feelings who drink for the same reason you do. And you may not get a conversion right away, but you get a, what's that? And it turned out identification is what had done it. And so they began to change their ploy. And they found another drunkard up in an Akron hospital, a friend of their sister Ignatia. I'll say one more thing. Now, this may or may not have happened. I can't remember every detail, but in 1960, I heard Sister Ignatia talk. And I stood in line and thanked her, and I was so overcome, I kissed her on the cheek. And I think I said, "Oh, is it okay to kiss a nun?" And I think she said, "As long as you don't get in the habit." Yeah. I don't remember. I can't remember every little detail 50 years ago, for Christ's sake. But they had a drunk up there. They went through her. And Sister Ignatia told the doctor, I'll talk to his wife, see if she wants him to do it. And I heard that guy talk years ago, Bill D. He said, "I was laying on that bed in Akron, Ohio. And my wife came to me and said there were two men who wanted to talk to me about my drinking. And I said, absolutely not. I've talked to all the people about my drinking I'm ever going to talk to. I'm sick of their lectures. I'm sick of their damn talking down to me like I'm nothing. No. But my wife is a rather strong woman. So I talked to them two fellas. And they never talked about my drinking once. They talked about their drinking and how they felt and why they drank. I never heard anybody describe me so well. I was so impressed, I stuck with them fellas. I've been with them ever since. He became number 3. Then they worked with people in the community, trying to get drunk. But the sad thing was they have to take them to the Oxford group. There are no meetings, just the Oxford group. They get to be the alcoholic wing of the Oxford group. But you'd bring people, they would, as soon as they got to the Oxford group, heard a little religion, they dropped off. In fact, this went on for a couple of years. Some years ago, I had an opportunity to sit and talk to Bill Wilson in his office, mainly by accident, because I was in New York and I wanted to see him, and they said, you have to be booked 2 weeks ahead. But I was standing around in the archives, and he came in and said, "You the young man want to talk to me?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, by 11 o'clock didn't show up, come on in." So we talked for an hour, and I'll tell you what he said. Well, I can't remember. That's a long time ago, come on. The one thing I remember about that conversation is this, because it struck me so much. I said, "Bill, we're just in our book study, we just got done doing Into Action. You talk about so much how to talk to a drunkard, what to say, how to make him feel and so on, but you never talk once about taking them to meetings. Don't you take people to meetings in the East Coast? We do all the time." He said, "Young man, when I wrote that chapter, there were no meetings. You had to do your cell after the meeting or before the meeting, not during the meeting. That set you back." But little by little, they learned that. Breaking down the defense by identification. And some years later, when they wrote the traditions, Bill stressed that. Interesting how they wrote the traditions based also, because Bill in 1941, the Saturday Evening Post had run this article, and there were all of a sudden thousands of AA meetings all over the country. And by 1942, they were falling apart. In 1943, they were canceling out. Bill would get 10 letters a day, 20 letters a day. "Take us off your mailing list. Our group is over." And in 1944, he started the Grapevine. I figured that would hold them together. It didn't help much. 1945, he knew they were going extinct, didn't know what to do about it. And he got an article in the Grapevine from some doctor in North Carolina talking about a movement that had been just like AA 100 years before. They called it the Washingtonians, where 6 drunks got together. One had just got out of jail. He came back, told his friends, that chaplain says he knows how I feel. He doesn't know how I feel. You guys know how I feel, but you're all drunks too. What good is that? So they took a vow to help each other stay sober. Very primeval AA method. Just when you feel like drinking, talk to your friends. And little by little, they got some more people, and finally grew pretty well. And they got some traveling speakers to get involved in it. Now, it sounds incredible, but after 5 years, they had estimated 100,000 sober members. AA, with all of its, with TV and phones and everything else, maybe not even 1,000 members after 5 years. But then after 5 years, the Washingtonians, their leadership did something that sounded right to them, because it sounds right to some people in AA today. If we're able to help drinkers, we should be able to help all sorts of people with problems. We could help narcotics addicts who don't drink, who they didn't take heroin and cocaine then, but laudanum and opium. We should help people with emotional problems. We should get involved in politics. We should get into the anti-slavery movement. We should try to get Texas as a state. On and on and on. That was the big item then. Well, they were wrong about that, but I wish I'd known that when I was in the Texas nut house. I'd have told them about it. But these 100,000 people, all got going. Help everybody. By 1848, 3 years later, the Washingtonians were extinct, and with very few exceptions, they all died drunk on the street. I had a book home written by one of the few survivors. He said, we were doing so well, and then after a while, we were doing so many things, we didn't have time to help a drunk when he came around, and we just got so many things, and one by one, they just quit. And Bill Wilson had never heard of the Washingtonians. They were so extinct. But he read about their history, he read his letters, and on that basis, he sat down in 1945 and wrote the 12 traditions, based on the Washingtonian experience in some regard. And he issued them, as we know, one by one in his new grapevine. Most of the membership didn't want them. We don't want any rules! We're here for love, goddammit! Yeah. So Bill Wilson would stick his wife in a sidecar of his motorcycle and drive all over the East Coast, try to explain it, and didn't do much good. But it's interesting, those traditions. They finally accepted them. They created the first international convention in 1950 in Cleveland, and they passed the traditions there. They read them in the long form as they were written. And incidentally, Bill was not quite as perfect as we'd like him to be, nor is anybody else. But you hear him on the tape saying, he was not quite sure he had the votes to get him. He said, having heard the traditions read, seeing no objections, they're accepted. Because he knew they were essential to our survival. And one of the traditions still under effect. Third tradition. You hear that under beef all over the country. After all we know about identification, the only requirement for membership is desire to stop drinking. Non-alcoholics, people, weirdos, come to AA meetings. You shouldn't be in here. I have a desire to stop drinking, that makes me a member. What do you say to that? Here's what you say. You find the long form of the third tradition from which it was abbreviated. It says, we help all those who suffer from the disease of alcoholism. When they abbreviated it, they had no idea that someday non-alcoholics would try to sneak into AA. You know, you can't get alcoholics in, why would non-alcoholics want to go? And the fifth tradition, oddly enough, in his first writing, he said something to the effect that we want to help all those who suffer. And his membership said, no, Bill, all those who suffer from the disease of alcoholism. Not rampant. Then let's not get into the Washingtonians. And so the traditions have rather stirred. And the traditions really have been under not very much attack. They're under attack again now. There's a group of weirdos, group of our members in New York who think we should get rid of anonymity. There's a big long article in the New York Times about it, written by a guy who signed his name, and he listed a few other names of people, writers, who thought we should do that. We don't need to be protected anymore. We're proud to be alcoholics. They never seem to understand the point of the 12th tradition. Our anonymity is not to protect us. It may have been in 1935 or 40 or 45. But what it is, it's a spiritual exercise in your own ego. And none of them seem to bring up that point. No, we don't need protection. And, well, a big hubbub in New York and having fights about it and starting meetings without anonymity and nonsense. Now they're getting rid of God in New York, some of the areas, having a new pamphlet on atheism. You know the problem with being an atheist? When you die, you're dressed up and no place to go. Seems to me. And the other great argument that came out of all this hubbub is all of the well-intentioned treatment centers. I know they mean well. It's all one big disease. And you don't have to go to different meetings. Do you know where that came from? That came from a treatment center that only had one van. But the greatest efficacy that I know, or the greatest example is this. In the late 1950s in Los Angeles, there was a guy named Jim Willis who was a bad gambler and a bad alcoholic. And he got sober in AA, married Sybil Willis, he had 8 other names after that, so I don't remember who. But he would bring his gambler friends to AA. Maybe he could be helped. That's nice, but I don't hear what these juicers got to say. What the hell they got to do with me? Nothing. Ugh. So he finally wrote to New York and got permission, the first one to get permission to use the 12 steps outside of AA. And he formed Gamblers Anonymous. Then some guys over the North Hollywood Club, narcotics addicts who'd been bringing their junkie friends to meetings, and they didn't like him either, got permission to use the steps for Narcotics Anonymous. Then some guys on the west side, Marina, got permission to use the steps for Cocaine Anonymous. Then a woman in the mid-Wilshire district got permission to use Overeaters Anonymous, and those are the big four. And it's because of one reason, because they didn't have identification in the solution till they got their own sickness. I never really understood that till when I was 2 years sober. I've told this story many times, but you could suffer through it one more time. I was really on fire. I'd been slipping for 10 years, and all of a sudden I was sober 2 years, and I still had no front teeth. They'd been kicked out in the Phoenix drunk tank. And I weighed about 130 pounds. I looked like a wraith. But I was talking at the club one day on obsessions. Because I'm an authority on obsessions. Not the recovery from them, just the obsessions. And then and this kind of plump woman came up first and says, "That was wonderful. I never heard anybody talk about that before. Would you come and talk to our ladies at the Christ the King Church over on Olympic Boulevard Sunday? We have a group there called Overeaters Anonymous." I said, "Sure. I'll show them what to shoot for." And so I went over there, and I gave them a great talk on obsessions. They liked it. I could just see the... Then they had a sharing session, and I couldn't believe my ears. Woman over here, her son was into military school in Long Beach. It was his 10th birthday. She sent her husband down to get him. She took out the birthday cake that she had for them. Took a little slice to make sure it was just what he wanted. Had another little slice. By the time he got back, she'd eaten the whole cake. And she felt so bad about it. They all cried, and it was just sad. Then someone over here talked about ice cream. "Oh, I love ice cream. When my husband goes to work, he's a professional man, but I still go to the doctor. I go down to the store and I get ice cream. I love ice cream. It makes me feel whole and complete. I eat a lot of it." And I didn't say anything because I'm too nice a guy. But I wanted to say, no wonder you're fat, for Christ's sake. My favorite was a woman over here said, "I ate till I couldn't eat anymore, and then I put my finger down my throat and vomited up so I could eat some more." And I didn't say anything. But I wanted to say, don't bother shaking hands after the meeting. Slimy finger. Now, what was different? I understood. I'm smart. I'm very intellectual. I know exactly what they're talking about, and I could empathize with it in a way. But I didn't identify with it. It was just a foreign experience. Why would people do that? And that is exactly why we have identification. You can talk to your folks till you're blue in the face, but they'll never understand why you drink. Not even a glass of wine at Christmas? Nothing? What's it? Because they don't understand. It's not that they're being obtuse, they just don't understand. But identification is such an important thing. I mean, now, for instance, a woman throwing up, I can see doing that for drinking. I've done that a lot of times. Jesus, Saturday afternoon, I'm drunk already. But for eating? Why? Because I did not identify, that's all. That is why it is so important. That is why again and again and again and again we push singleness of purpose. It has nothing to do with merit, has nothing to do with intelligence, has nothing to do with charm. It has to do with breaking that wall of defense, and you can't do it with advice, because advice bounces off on the floor. Because in the last analysis this morning, 76 years and 1 day since Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob got together, when Dr. Bob stopped drinking, Alcoholics Anonymous is still the same. We have some wonderful speakers this weekend. Heard a charming, well, Hispanic. I've known her since she was a little girl. I can talk mean to her. Anyway. But we have good speakers, more from Florida, hither and yon, and good meetings, and all kinds of varieties of experiences and participations and workshops and all kinds. But they're all just secondary. The book is secondary. The meetings are secondary. The conventions are secondary. Everything is secondary to one thing that you and I must maintain if we are ever to continue to have something to offer to the people behind us. One alcoholic talking to another alcoholic to help him reduce his feelings of being different at least enough so that he will take an action he does not yet believe in. When that moment comes, that is the spark, the ember of sobriety. Then we have to blow on it and surround ourselves with people who tell us how to build it into a flame and to keep that flame burning brightly as long as we live so that people lost behind us can see where to go. Thank you.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, than one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.